rang out, there were a lot of people in their front yard trying to figure out what was going on. And now, even though they know what happened, there's still a lot of confusion in this neighborhood.
To know that this happened, this is heartbreaking.
October 19th, 2023, in Daytona Beach, Florida. An argument between a couple had reached a dangerous point. Voices rose. Words were exchanged that could not easily be taken back. The wife accused him of cheating. What began as a dispute between husband and wife had quickly grown tense enough that one person in that house realized things were getting out of hand. She reached for her phone and called the two people she trusted most, her parents. She asked them to come over. Within moments of her parents stepping into the house, the situation shifted from a heated dispute to something far more dangerous. Right in front of them, he shot her and also threatened to kill them also. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles if you enjoy real cases told with depth and detail. And while you're here, tell us where you're watching from around the world. I always find it fascinating to see how far these stories reach. Shawntai Adkins was simply a daughter, a family member, and someone whose life revolved around the people closest to her. Those who knew Shawntai often described her as someone who cared deeply about family. She maintained a close relationship with her parents, and that bond would later become one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case. For Shawntai, her parents were not just relatives she spoke to occasionally. They were people she relied on when life became difficult. Friends and family said she was the kind of person who stayed connected to the people she loved. She kept in touch, checked in often, and valued time spent together. Her parents, in particular, remained an important part of her life, well into adulthood. If something was wrong, they were among the first people she would reach out to. Her family saw her as someone who wanted what many people want out of life: security, companionship, and a peaceful home. She had grown up surrounded by support, and that closeness with her parents carried into her adult years. That connection would later become painfully clear on the day everything went wrong. Because when Shawntai felt overwhelmed by the argument inside her home on October 19, 2023, she didn't call the police first. She didn't call a friend, she called her parents. That choice alone says a lot about the trust she had in them and the role they played in her life. To Shawntai, they were the people who could step in and help calm things down when emotions were running high. But long before that final phone call, Shawntai's life had taken a direction she likely believed would lead to stability and partnership. At some point in her adult life, she met a man named Shantell Adkins. The two eventually formed a relationship that grew serious enough to lead to marriage. Like many couples at the beginning of their journey together, there were hopes for a future built on trust and commitment. From the outside, their relationship may have appeared like many others: a husband and wife building a life together. But relationships can sometimes change over time. What begins with excitement and promise can slowly become strained by disagreements, mistrust, and personal struggles. And according to details that would later come out in court, the relationship between Shawntai and her husband had started to experience growing tension in the months leading up to the tragedy. Arguments had become more frequent. Disagreements had become more intense. In the beginning, there may have been little reason for anyone to suspect the relationship would end in tragedy. From the outside, they appeared to be a married couple trying to navigate life together. But as time went on, problems began to emerge inside the relationship. Like many marriages under strain, disagreements started to appear more frequently. Arguments that might once have been small disagreements gradually became more intense. One of the major issues that began to create tension between them involved trust. According to details that later surfaced during the investigation and court proceedings, Shawntai had started to suspect that her husband might have been involved with someone else. Suspicion of infidelity can create deep fractures in a relationship, especially when communication breaks down and accusations replace trust. For Shawntai, those suspicions became a source of growing frustration. She reportedly confronted Shantell about messages she had discovered that suggested he might be seeing another woman. Situations like this often lead to emotional confrontations, and in their home, those confrontations began to happen more often. At the same time, other issues were adding pressure to the relationship. Shantell Adkins had been dealing with struggles related to alcohol. In fact, he had recently entered a rehabilitation program in an effort to address his drinking. While entering treatment can be a positive step toward change, it can also be a difficult period for couples. Stress, frustration, and unresolved issues can intensify during times like this. One particular point of conflict reportedly involved a motorcycle that belonged to Shawntai. According to testimony later presented in court, Shawntai had accused her husband of riding her motorcycle while he was intoxicated. To her, that behavior represented not only recklessness, but also a disregard for her concerns. Arguments about that issue added to the already growing tension between them. Friends and family may not always see what happens inside someone else's home. Many couples keep their problems private, sharing only what they want others to see. But behind closed doors, the strain between Shawntai and Shantell continued to build. Trust had eroded. Communication had become confrontational. And emotional pressure inside the marriage kept increasing. On October 19, 2023, another argument began inside their home in Daytona Beach. But this one would not end the way previous arguments had. Because by that point, the tension between Shawntai and Shantell had reached a level that neither of them seemed able to control. And on that day, everything finally exploded. As the argument continued, Shawntai began to realize that the situation was becoming too intense for her to handle alone. At that moment, she made a decision that many people make when conflict inside the home becomes overwhelming. She called her parents. Her parents had always been a source of support in her life. When things were difficult, they were the people she trusted to step in and help calm a situation. So, Shawntai picked up her phone and reached out to them. During that call, her voice likely carried the tension of the moment. "Can you come over?" she reportedly asked them. "I need help calming this down." To her parents, the request sounded serious but manageable. Parents often step in when their adult children are dealing with relationship problems, hoping to help bring tempers down and prevent things from getting worse. They left immediately and drove to Shawntai's house. At the time, they believed they were heading into a tense but familiar situation, a domestic argument that needed a calm voice and some space to cool off. They had no reason to believe that their daughter's life was in immediate danger. By the time Shawntai's parents arrived at the house, the atmosphere inside was already charged with frustration and anger. They entered hoping to calm things down. Parents often believe their presence alone can help diffuse an argument between two people they care about. They might step in, separate the individuals involved, and encourage everyone to take a breath. But almost immediately, it became clear that this situation was far more volatile than they expected. The tension in the room was obvious. Voices were still raised, emotions were still running high. Shawntai's parents likely hoped they could guide their daughter out of the situation. Perhaps the plan was to leave the house together, give everyone time to cool down, and address the issues later. But before anyone could bring the situation under control, the conflict inside that house shifted in a direction no one present could have predicted. Inside the home, the argument between Shawntai and her husband had not cooled down. The energy in the room was still intense. Voices had already been raised before her parents arrived, and their presence did little to calm the situation immediately. Like many parents would do, they tried to step in and separate the two. Their goal was simple: de-escalate the argument and get Shawntai out of the house until everyone had time to calm down. Family members often play this role during conflicts, acting as a buffer between two people whose emotions have taken control of the moment. For a brief moment, it seemed like that might be possible. Shawntai began preparing to leave the house with them. The plan appeared straightforward. She would step outside with her parents, put distance between herself and the argument, and give everyone time to cool down. It was the kind of solution families often rely on when tempers rise inside a home. But before Shawntai could walk out the door, something shifted. The situation inside the house escalated suddenly. At some point during those tense moments, Shantell Adkins retrieved a rifle. What happened next unfolded quickly, leaving almost no time for anyone in the room to react. From the perspective of Shawntai's parents, the moment must have been shocking. Just seconds earlier, they had been attempting to calm an argument between their daughter and her husband. Now they were staring at a firearm inside the same room. There was likely confusion in that instant. Perhaps disbelief. Then the situation reached its most tragic point. Shantell raised the rifle and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the home. The bullet struck Shawntai in the neck. In a single moment, everything changed. Shawntai collapsed. For her parents, the experience was unimaginable. They had come to help their daughter leave a tense situation, and instead they had just witnessed her being shot right in front of them. The room that had been filled with shouting only moments earlier was now filled with panic and terror. Instinct took over. Their only thought in that moment was to escape the house as quickly as possible. The man who had just fired the rifle was still inside, and they had no idea what he might do next. As they rushed towards safety, the chaos of the moment made everything even more dangerous. During the desperate attempt to flee, Shawntai's father fell and broke his leg while trying to escape the house. Despite the injury, the urgency of the situation forced them to keep moving. Fear and shock pushed them forward as they tried to get away from the home where the shooting had just occurred. Inside that house, Shawntai lay wounded from the gunshot. The argument that had begun as a dispute between a married couple had turned into a deadly act of violence within seconds. Outside, her parents were now injured, terrified, and trying to process what had just happened. Calls for help would soon be made. Emergency responders and police would be on their way. But in that moment, the situation was still unfolding. The violence inside the home had already claimed one victim, and the man responsible was still inside. Within moments, police would be called to the scene. But the nightmare inside that house was far from over. Do you think there were warning signs that could have prevented this tragedy? Share what you think in the comment. Calls for help began almost immediately after the shooting. Neighbors and emergency responders were alerted, and within a short period of time, police officers and medical personnel were dispatched to the home in Daytona Beach. What they arrived to find was a scene that reflected the chaos that had unfolded only minutes earlier. Outside the home, Shawntai's parents were in distress. They had just witnessed their daughter being shot, and in the frantic attempt to escape the house, Shawntai's father had suffered a serious injury to his leg. The shock of what they had seen was still fresh, and the fear that the gunman remained inside made the situation even more urgent. Officers moved quickly to secure the area. Inside the house, they found Shawntai Adkins critically injured from the gunshot wound. The violent argument that had erupted inside the home had ended with devastating consequences, but Shawntai was not the only person wounded. Not long after firing the fatal shot, Shantell Adkins turned the weapon on himself and shot himself in the shoulder. The injury did not prove fatal, but it left him wounded inside the house when authorities arrived. Emergency responders treated both individuals at the scene. Shawntai's injuries were severe. Despite the efforts of first responders, the gunshot wound proved fatal. The woman who had called her parents for help only minutes earlier had lost her life inside her own home. Meanwhile, Shantell Adkins was taken into custody. Because he had survived the self-inflicted wound, authorities were able to question him and begin the process of building a criminal case around what had happened inside the house that day. As officers worked to secure the scene, evidence began to clarify the sequence of events. The rifle used in the shooting was recovered inside the home, and the statements given by Shawntai's parents provided a direct account of what had happened moments before the gun was fired. Their testimony described how they had arrived, hoping to calm the argument and help their daughter leave the house safely. Instead, they had watched the situation turn deadly. Investigators also began examining the circumstances that led to the confrontation earlier that day. Information gathered during the investigation confirmed that the couple had been arguing about issues that had been building in their relationship. Suspicions of infidelity, disputes over behavior, and ongoing tension between the two. The case quickly moved from an active emergency to a criminal investigation. Based on the evidence collected at the scene and the statements provided by witnesses, Authorities charged Shantell Adkins with first-degree murder. Additional charges were also filed for aggravated assault related to the threats made against Shawntai's parents during the violent confrontation. For Shawntai's family, the arrest brought a measure of accountability, but it did nothing to ease the grief of losing their daughter in such a brutal and public way. The case would now move into the legal system, where prosecutors would prepare to present the evidence to a jury. And as the investigation continued, more details about the events leading up to the shooting began to emerge. After the investigation concluded and the evidence had been gathered, the case against Shantell Adkins moved into the courtroom. Prosecutors formally charged him with first-degree murder with a firearm in connection with the killing of his wife, Shawntai Adkins. In addition to the murder charge, he also faced 2 counts of aggravated assault for threatening Shawntai's parents during the violent confrontation that ended her life. The charges reflected the severity of what had happened inside that Daytona Beach home on October 19, 2023. Prosecutors argued that the shooting was not an accident or an act of self-defense. Instead, they described it as a deliberate act of violence carried out during an argument in front of witnesses. When the trial began, the courtroom became the place where Shawntai's final moments would be examined in detail. Prosecutors presented their case by reconstructing the events that led to the shooting. They described how the argument between Shawntai and her husband had escalated and how Shawntai had called her parents to come help calm the situation. According to the prosecution, Shawntai had been preparing to leave the house with her parents when the situation suddenly turned deadly. The most powerful testimony came from the 2 people who had witnessed the tragedy firsthand: Shawntai's parents. Taking the stand, they recounted the moment they arrived at their daughter's home after receiving her call for help. Their testimony described how they attempted to calm the argument and help Shawntai leave the house safely. But instead of seeing the situation settle down, they watched as the confrontation escalated. They told the jury how Shantell Adkins retrieved a rifle during the dispute, and how, in a matter of seconds, he raised the weapon and fired. For Shawntai's parents, reliving those moments in court was devastating. They had not only lost their daughter, they had witnessed the exact moment her life was taken. Their testimony forced them to revisit the fear and shock of that day, describing how they fled the house in terror after the gunshot rang out. Evidence presented in court supported their account of the events. Prosecutors pointed to the rifle recovered from the home and the sequence of events described by witnesses. They argued that the evidence clearly showed Shawntai had been attempting to leave when she was shot. Throughout the trial, the emotional weight inside the courtroom was impossible to ignore. Shawntai's family members sat through the proceedings as the details of her final moments were discussed in front of strangers. For them, the trial was not simply about legal arguments, it was about the life of someone they loved. After both sides finished presenting their cases, the jury was given the responsibility of deciding the defendant's fate. They left the courtroom to begin deliberations. The evidence they had heard was clear, and the testimony from Shawntai's parents had provided a direct account of the shooting. It did not take long. 17 minutes later, the jury returned, and a decision had been reached. Stories like the one involving Shawntai Adkins are difficult to hear, but they also highlight important lessons about relationships, conflict, and how quickly situations can become dangerous when tensions escalate. Many violent incidents inside homes do not begin with immediate physical harm. Instead, they often develop over time through patterns that slowly intensify. One of the most common warning signs is arguments that grow more frequent and more intense. Every couple disagrees from time to time, but when disagreements constantly turn into shouting matches or heated confrontations, it can signal that deeper problems are developing within the relationship. Another common factor is jealousy, combined with accusations of infidelity. Suspicion can quickly lead to emotional confrontations, mistrust, and anger. When these accusations happen repeatedly and are fueled by resentment, they can create a volatile environment where even small disagreements turn into major conflicts. Substance abuse can also play a role in increasing tension. alcohol, or drug use can lower judgment and intensify emotions during arguments. When a person is already dealing with anger or frustration, substances may increase impulsive reactions and make situations more unpredictable. In Shawntai's case, tensions had reportedly been building over issues such as suspected cheating and disagreements about behavior. Over time, these arguments became more heated. Situations like this can create an atmosphere where emotions stay close to the surface, and conflict can escalate quickly. Another critical factor in many domestic violence situations is the moment someone decides to leave or distance themselves from the conflict. Experts often point out that this period can be especially dangerous when one person believes the relationship may be ending or that they are losing control of the situation. Emotions can rise sharply. This is why support systems are so important. Family members, friends, and trusted individuals can provide a vital safety net when tensions inside a relationship become overwhelming. Shawntai reached out to her parents because she trusted them to help calm the situation. Many people in similar situations rely on loved ones for support when they feel unsafe or unable to resolve a conflict on their own. Seeking help early can sometimes prevent situations from reaching a breaking point. Whether that support comes from family, friends, counselors, or community resources, having people who can step in during difficult moments can make a significant difference. Awareness also plays an important role. Communities that talk openly about domestic violence, relationship conflict, and safety are often better prepared to recognize when someone might be in danger. Conversations about healthy relationships and how to handle conflict can help people understand when a situation may be becoming unsafe. Stories like Shawntai's remind us how quickly a disagreement can escalate when anger, mistrust, and emotional strain collide. And they raise an important question for all of us. Cases like this raise difficult questions. Do you think tragedies like this could be prevented if warning signs were taken more seriously? Long before her name appeared in court records and news headlines, Shawntai Adkins was simply a daughter who shared a close bond with her parents. She was someone who trusted them enough to call when she felt overwhelmed, and believed they could help bring calm to a difficult situation. That final phone call speaks volumes about the relationship she had with them. On October 19, 2023, when the argument inside her home grew too intense, Shawntai did what many people would do. She reached out to the people she loved most and asked for help. Her parents responded immediately, leaving their home and driving to her house with one goal in mind: to help their daughter. They believed they were arriving to settle an argument. Instead, they arrived just moments before a tragedy that would forever change their lives. For Shawntai's parents, the pain of losing their daughter is something they will carry for the rest of their lives. But the heartbreak is made even deeper by the fact that they were there when it happened. They witnessed the moment their daughter's life was taken, something no parent should ever have to experience. What began as an effort to help her ended with a memory that will never leave them. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, Shawntai's family was left to cope with the loss of someone who had been an important part of their lives. The home where she should have felt safe became the place where her life ended, and the people who loved her most were forced to confront the reality of how quickly everything had changed. Behind every true crime story, there is a real person whose life mattered. These stories are not just about investigations or court verdicts. They are about families whose lives are permanently altered by violence. They are about parents who must now live with memories of a child they loved and the painful circumstances surrounding their loss. Shawntai Adkins' story is one of those tragedies. A woman who trusted the people closest to her. A daughter who reached out for help when a situation became too difficult to manage alone. And a life that ended in a moment of violence that no one present that day could ever forget. Her story reminds us how quickly conflict can turn into tragedy, and how the choices people make in moments of anger can leave lasting consequences for everyone involved. If stories like this remind us how important awareness and support can be, consider sharing this video so more people can learn from it. And don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles for more real cases like this.